When we read the story of the Exodus, it is easy to look at the unleavened bread as nothing more than ancient fast food. We picture a chaotic night in Egypt. Families are rushing to pack their belongings. The clock is ticking. Pharaoh has finally broken, and the window to escape is narrow. Because they are in such a hurry, the Israelites do not have time to let their bread dough rise. They bake it flat, grab it, and run into the wilderness. That sounds completely practical. It feels like a logical, historical detail in a story about a rushed midnight escape. But there is a problem with reading the text that way. If unleavened bread was only a practical necessity because they were running late, why did God command it before the panic even started? And more importantly, why did God turn a simple baking inconvenience into a permanent, mandatory, 7-day theological festival for the rest of Israel's history? Think about the other symbols of the Exodus. The blood on the doorpost makes sense as a symbol of salvation. The parting of the Red Sea makes sense as a symbol of deliverance. But a flat piece of bread? If it was just about saving time on one specific night, making it a permanent religious command feels entirely out of proportion. But the text is doing something deeper. And that is where the story begins to open. In Exodus chapter 12, before the final plague even falls on Egypt, God gives Moses the instructions for the Passover meal. He tells the people exactly how to prepare the lamb. He tells them to put the blood on the doorposts. And then, right in the middle of these massive matters of life and death, God gives a very specific, unbreakable rule about bread. He says that for 7 days, they must eat bread without yeast. But he does not stop there. He adds a warning. God declares that whoever eats bread made with yeast during those 7 days will be completely cut off from the community of Israel. That sounds small. It is not. To be cut off from the covenant people is one of the heaviest, most devastating sentences in the Hebrew scriptures. It means losing your place in the family of God. It means losing your protection. It means being exiled from the promise. And here, on the night of liberation, that severe punishment is attached to yeast. Not murder, not idolatry, not theft, but baking a loaf of bread the normal way. This detail changes how we have to look at the unleavened bread on the Passover table. It was not merely a side effect of being in a hurry. It was a strict divine requirement. God was not just managing their travel schedule. He was intentionally forcing them to eat a specific physical object that carried a massive spiritual weight. He was using a piece of dough to break the psychological chains of an empire. For thousands of years, modern readers have flattened the meaning of this bread. We treat it as nothing more than a memory of a rushed exit. But God was using a baking instruction to teach a newly freed nation about the nature of human pride, the hidden spread of corruption, and the profound meaning of true purity. To understand why God was so uncompromising about this bread, and why Jesus would later hold it in his hands on the night before his crucifixion, we have to look closer at the command itself. Because the unleavened bread was never just about saving time. It was about what the yeast actually represented. Let's look closely at the exact instructions God gave to Moses. In Exodus chapter 12, God outlines the parameters of the feast. He says, "For 7 days you are to eat bread made without yeast." If the command stopped there, we might still assume it was just a unique menu for a unique week. But God adds a critical instruction that must happen before the feast even begins. He commands the Israelites to remove all yeast from their houses. The Hebrew text is intense. It is not just a casual suggestion to clear out the pantry. It is a demand for total eradication. Before the first day of the festival, every trace of leaven had to be completely gone. If a family wanted to be protected by the blood of the lamb, if they wanted to participate in the Passover, they had to search their entire living space. They had to sweep the floors. They had to inspect their clay bowls and their wooden kneading troughs. They had to ensure that not a single crumb of leavened bread and not a single lump of fermented dough remained inside their walls. Think about the timing of this command. This is the night of the Exodus. Outside their doors, Egypt is descending into chaos. The plagues have devastated the empire. The final, terrible judgment of the firstborn is approaching. The Israelites are supposed to be packing their belongings, preparing their children, and bracing for a long, dangerous journey into an unknown wilderness. And yet, right in the middle of this massive historical crisis, God tells them to sweep their floors. He forces them to stop and conduct a meticulous, physical search of their homes for yeast. And as we noted earlier, the penalty for ignoring this detail was devastating. God repeated the warning twice in the same chapter. He declared that whoever eats anything with yeast in it during those 7 days must be cut off from the community of Israel. Whether they were a foreigner living among them or a native-born Israelite, the rule was absolute. There were no exceptions. This is where the text demands our full attention. God is not just organizing an escape route. He is establishing a profound connection between a physical object and a spiritual reality. He is treating a common baking ingredient as if it were a deadly contagion. He is declaring that the presence of this specific element is completely incompatible with the freedom he is about to bring. You cannot keep the leaven and also step into the promise. You must choose. For thousands of years, Jewish families have taken this command literally and seriously. Even today, in the days leading up to the Passover meal, observant households undergo a rigorous cleaning process. They search every room, often by candlelight, to find, gather, and burn any remaining trace of leaven. The physical act of sweeping the house has become an anchor of biblical memory, but we have to ask why. Why did God choose this specific symbol? Why not command them to sweep out the dirt, or burn their old slave garments, or smash their Egyptian idols? Why target the bread dough? To answer that, we have to unlearn how we think about baking today. When a modern reader hears the word yeast, they usually picture a small, dry packet of powder bought from a grocery store. It is a cheap, easily replaceable, entirely disconnected ingredient. You tear open the packet, mix it into the flour, bake your loaf, and when you want to bake again next week, you simply open another packet. But in the biblical world, yeast was not a dry, sterile powder. It was something entirely different. And the way bread was actually made in ancient Egypt reveals exactly what the Israelites were being forced to leave behind. To understand the severity of God's command, we have to look at the empire Israel was leaving behind. Egypt was the superpower of the ancient world. But it was not just a military empire, it was a baking empire. Historians and archaeologists note that ancient Egypt essentially perfected the art of commercial bread making. The tombs of the pharaohs are filled with artwork showing massive, complex bakeries. They learned to harvest wild yeast and cultivate it. They fed their workforce, their armies, and their elite with soft, towering, leavened loaves. In Egypt, bread was a symbol of agricultural wealth, stability, and human mastery over the natural world. But the yeast they used was not something you could buy in a modern store. In the Hebrew text of Exodus chapter 12, the word for leaven is seor. Seor is not a dry powder. It is a starter dough. It is a piece of fermented, sour dough kept alive from a previous batch. Here is how baking worked in the biblical world. When a person baked bread, they would mix the flour and water. But before they baked the loaf, they would pinch off a small lump of the raw dough and set it aside. They would let that lump sit in the open air, allowing it to ferment. The next time they baked, they would take that sour, fermented lump the seor and fold it into the new batch of flour. The old dough would work its way through the new dough, causing the whole batch to rise. Then, they would pinch off a piece of that new batch and save it for the next time. This created a continuous, unbroken chain. Every new loaf of bread contained a microscopic piece of the loaf that came before it. A family's starter dough could be kept alive for years. It was a living, breathing timeline. Now, think about what this meant for the Israelites on the night of the Passover. Their starter doughs were Egyptian. Their seor had been mixed in the shadow of the empire. It had been sustained during generations of bitter slavery. Every loaf they baked contained the literal, physical continuity of the culture that oppressed them. When God commanded them to search their houses and sweep out every trace of the old leaven, He was doing something deeply theological. He was not just telling them to speed up their cooking. He was forcing them to break the cycle. He was saying, you cannot bring a piece of the old empire into the new promise. You cannot carry the fermentation of Egypt into the wilderness. You must sever the chain. To eat unleavened bread was to start completely over. It was a physical reset. It was a tangible, edible declaration that their future would not be infected by their past. By sweeping out the seor, Israel was performing a physical rejection of Egyptian culture. They were turning their backs on the soft, puffed-up, boastful bread of the pharaohs. They were stripping away the influence of the world they had known, preparing to become an entirely new people. This makes sense of the severe punishment. To keep the old yeast was to insist on keeping a piece of Egypt. It was a refusal to let go of the old world. So, on the night they left, they ate the flat, simple bread of a new beginning. But 40 years later, the meaning of this bread deepens again. The generation that left Egypt passes away. A new generation stands on the edge of the promised land. And just before they enter, Moses reminds them of the Passover command. But Moses gives the unleavened bread a surprising new title, and that title changes the entire picture. 40 years have passed since the night of the Exodus. The generation that originally swept the yeast from their homes in Egypt has passed away in the wilderness. Now, a new generation is standing at the edge of the promised land. They are preparing to cross the Jordan River and finally step into the inheritance God promised to Abraham. But before they enter, Moses delivers a final series of speeches. We find these speeches in the book of Deuteronomy. Moses knows that when this new generation settles in the land, when they plant vineyards and build houses, they will be tempted to forget how they got there. They will be tempted to think they earned their freedom. So, in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 3, Moses repeats the command for the Passover. He tells them to eat unleavened bread for 7 days. But this time, he gives the bread a specific title. He calls it the bread of affliction. That is a strange name for a meal of celebration. Why not call it the bread of freedom? Why not call it the bread of victory or the bread of deliverance? Why anchor the greatest festival of the year to the memory of affliction? To understand this, we have to look at what unleavened bread actually is. Bread without yeast is flat. It is dense, it is heavy. It requires no waiting, no special starter, and no mastery of the baking arts. In the ancient world, it was the food of the poor. It was the ration of a slave. It was the meal of someone who owned nothing, controlled nothing, and had no time to spare. Contrast that with the bread of Egypt. The leavened loaves of the pharaohs were towering, soft, and rich. Yeast takes a small piece of dough and makes it look larger than it actually is. Fermentation introduces pockets of gas. It creates the illusion of great substance by filling the bread with empty air. Leavened bread looks impressive. It looks proud. God commands Israel to eat the flat, heavy bread of affliction so they will never become puffed up. He wants them to remember their total dependence. When an Israelite sat down in the promised land, surrounded by their own fields and their own harvest, holding a piece of flat bread, they were holding a physical reminder of their own helplessness. The bread said, "You did not save yourself. You were slaves. You had nothing. And the God of the universe reached down and pulled you out." The bread of affliction was a defense against arrogance. It was a yearly physical reset for the soul of the nation. They had left the empire of Egypt, but God knew the pride of Egypt could easily take root in their own hearts. They had to leave the yeast behind because they had to leave the pride behind. Pause for a second and look at the movement we have seen so far. The yeast began as a literal baking ingredient in Egypt. Then it became a symbol of the old empire that had to be swept away. And now, here in Deuteronomy, the absence of yeast is directly connected to humility, poverty of spirit, and total dependence on God. A physical reality is becoming a theological reality. Yeast is no longer just a starter dough. It is becoming a picture of human pride. It represents something that puffs itself up, looks impressive on the outside, but is fundamentally full of empty air. And this idea that leaven represents something proud, hidden, and silently spreading does not stop in the wilderness. It becomes one of the most consistent and powerful metaphors in the rest of the Bible. It moves from the Passover table directly into the center of Israel's worship. Because when God gives the instructions for the holy sacrifices, he makes another unbreakable rule about yeast. In the book of Leviticus, God establishes the rules for how the people are to approach him. He gives detailed instructions for the sacrifices, the priesthood, and the tabernacle. And in chapter 2, when he describes the grain offering, God draws a very clear line. He says that no grain offering presented to the Lord may be made with yeast. It is strictly forbidden. No leaven is allowed to be burned on the holy altar. To understand why, we have to look closely at the nature of fermentation itself. In the ancient biblical imagination, fermentation was not viewed simply as a cooking technique. It was understood as a process of decay. The souring of the starter dough was a form of microscopic corruption. The dough was literally breaking down, souring, and spoiling. When a baker takes a piece of old, fermented dough and folds it into a new batch of pure flour and water. What actually happens? The old dough infects the new. It works its way through the entire batch. It spreads silently. It spreads invisibly. You cannot stop it once it starts. It changes the internal nature of everything it touches. So, when God sets up the sacrificial system, He demands absolute purity. The altar is the place where the holy God meets humanity. It is the center of life and forgiveness. God is declaring that you cannot bring the symbol of hidden decay into the presence of perfect holiness. The offering must be pure. It must be entirely free from the spreading rot of the old world. Pause for a second and see what has emerged. So far, this has not been a random set of details. The command began in Egypt as a physical severing from the empire. Then it moved into the wilderness as the bread of affliction, a symbol of absolute dependence and humility. And now, it arrives at the altar as a severe warning against hidden corruption. The picture is becoming impossible to miss. Yeast is now firmly established in the biblical vocabulary. It is no longer just about baking. It is a profound theological image. It represents human pride, showing how arrogance puffs us up and makes us look more substantial than we really are. And it represents sin, showing how a small, hidden compromise never stays small. It slowly corrupts the whole person. It slowly corrupts the whole community. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. By the time we reach the 1st century, this metaphor is deeply embedded in the mind of every Jewish person. Every single year at Passover, families would meticulously sweep their houses clean of it. Every grain offering presented at the temple in Jerusalem was baked flat. The absence of yeast was a constant, physical reminder to stay humble and to guard against the silent spread of sin. The people knew exactly what leaven meant, and this is where the story shifts into the pages of the New Testament. Because when Jesus begins his public ministry, he takes up this exact vocabulary. He uses the imagery of leaven to issue one of his most urgent warnings, but he does not apply the metaphor to the Roman Empire. He does not apply it to the pagan nations surrounding them. He takes this ancient, deeply ingrained symbol of hidden corruption, and he points it directly at the most religious, outwardly holy men in Israel. In the 1st century, the religious leaders of Israel took the command of Passover very seriously. When the festival approached, the Pharisees would meticulously sweep their homes. They would search every corner, every bowl, and every shelf. They would make absolutely sure that not a single trace of physical yeast remained anywhere on their property. They were masters of external purity. To anyone watching, they were the perfect examples of obedience to the laws of Moses. But one day, Jesus is in a boat with his disciples. We find the story in Matthew chapter 16. The disciples realize they have forgotten to bring any bread for the journey across the lake. They are whispering among themselves, worried about their mistake. And suddenly, Jesus looks at them and gives a very sharp command. He says, "Watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." At first, the disciples are confused. They think he is reprimanding them because they forgot the literal groceries. But Jesus is not talking about baking. He is pulling on the ancient thread we have been tracing since the night in Egypt. He reminds them of the miracles they have just seen, the miraculous feeding of the thousands in the wilderness. Then he clarifies his warning. He tells them he is not talking about the yeast used in normal bread. He is talking about their teaching. He is talking about their internal condition. In Luke chapter 12, verse 1, Jesus makes the connection even more direct. He says, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees," which is hypocrisy. Notice what Jesus is doing here. He is standing in front of a religious system that prides itself on keeping its houses perfectly free of physical leaven. These men look incredibly pure on the outside. They wear the right clothes, they say the right prayers, and they keep the rules perfectly. But Jesus says they are completely infected. They are full of spiritual leaven. Think about how hypocrisy actually works. It functions exactly like an ancient sourdough starter. Hypocrisy puffs a person up. It makes them look larger, more righteous, and more substantial than they actually are. It creates the illusion of greatness by filling the person with empty air. On the outside, the loaf looks impressive, but on the inside, it is hollow. And worse, it spreads. Just like a small lump of fermented dough works its way through a new batch of flour, hypocrisy silently infects an entire community. If the religious leaders are secretly corrupt, That corruption will inevitably spread to the people who follow them. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. Jesus is warning his disciples that the empire of Egypt is still alive. The physical slavery is gone, but the pride of the old world is still thriving in the hearts of Israel's elite. The Pharisees have swept their floors, but they have not swept their souls. They are still eating the bread of pride, and Jesus is warning his followers to stay entirely away from it. He is telling them that in his kingdom, there is no room for hidden fermentation. There is no room for the silent spread of sin masquerading as righteousness. To follow him is to walk in complete sincerity, without the puffed-up air of religious performance. This warning is not just a passing metaphor. It is the setup for the climax of the entire biblical pattern. Because Jesus is preparing his disciples for a new exodus, he is preparing to lead them out of an empire much darker and much older than Egypt. And to do that, he has to establish a new covenant. Which brings us to a small upper room in Jerusalem. It is the night before the crucifixion. Jesus sits down at a table with his closest friends to eat the Passover, and it is a night entirely defined by the complete physical absence of leaven. In the hours before his arrest, Jesus gathers his disciples in an upper room in Jerusalem. They are there to eat the Passover. And because it is the Passover, we know exactly what that environment was like. Before they ever sat down to eat, that room would have been meticulously searched and swept. Every crumb of leavened bread, every trace of fermented starter dough would have been removed. It was a completely uncorrupted space. When we picture the Last Supper, we often rely on famous European paintings. We imagine a long table covered with soft, airy, beautifully baked loaves of bread. But that image is historically and theologically impossible. When Jesus sat down at that table, there were no puffed-up loaves. There was only the dense, unyielding bread of affliction. In the middle of the meal, the Gospel of Matthew tells us that Jesus took the bread, blessed it, and broke it. He handed it to his disciples and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." For centuries, readers have rightly focused on the act of breaking the bread. But we must also look at the exact kind of bread he was holding. He was not holding the bread of Egypt. He was not holding the bread of human pride, puffed up with the empty air of boasting. He was holding a loaf that had no old leaven inside it. It contained no hidden corruption. It contained no decay. It was entirely pure. When Jesus says, "This is my body," the physical reality of the unleavened bread perfectly matches the spiritual reality of who he is. Just hours earlier, he had warned his disciples about the leaven of the Pharisees. The religious leaders looked towering and impressive on the outside, but inside they were quietly infected with hypocrisy. Jesus is the exact opposite. He did not arrive looking like the towering, majestic kings of the Roman Empire. As the prophet Isaiah wrote centuries earlier, he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. He was a man of sorrows, familiar with grief. He came as a servant. He came in profound humility, choosing the path of the poor, the dependent, and the marginalized. He took on the likeness of the bread of affliction. But inside, there was no hidden sin. There was no secret agenda, no silent spread of corruption, no pride. He was completely free of the old world's decay. This is where the ancient pattern from the wilderness returns with overwhelming force. Remember the strict command from the book of Leviticus. God demanded that no grain offering placed on the holy altar could ever contain yeast. The sacrifice had to be perfectly free from the spreading rot of the old world. Now, Jesus is preparing to offer himself. He is preparing to walk toward the ultimate altar of the cross. To be the final sacrifice for human sin, he must be the pure offering. He must not have any of the old leaven in him, and he does not. He takes the bread of poverty, the bread of slaves, and he identifies his own life with it. He is showing them that he is taking their affliction upon himself. He is stepping into their slavery to lead a new exodus. He is the uncorrupted one, entering into the brokenness of the world to break the continuous cycle of sin once and for all. The Passover began in Egypt as a physical severing from an oppressor. Now, in this upper room, Jesus is instituting the final severing from the kingdom of darkness. He is starting an entirely new humanity. And when he takes that dense, unyielding bread in his hands and pulls it apart, the physical nature of that specific bread suddenly perfectly mirrors what is about to happen to him. When you break a piece of soft, leavened bread, it tears quietly. It gives way. But unleavened bread is different. It is dense. It is brittle. When you break it, it snaps. It fractures. The physical act of breaking the bread of affliction is a violent picture. And as Jesus fractures that bread in the upper room, he hands it to his disciples and says, "This is my body, which is given for you." For centuries, the prophet Isaiah had warned Israel about what the coming Savior would endure. Isaiah chapter 53 says, "He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. He was oppressed and afflicted." Jesus takes the bread of affliction, the food of the poor and the enslaved, and he completely identifies himself with it. He is saying, "I am about to step into your slavery. I am about to take your affliction onto myself." When Jesus is arrested, beaten, and nailed to the Roman cross, he is acting as the ultimate, uncorrupted Passover offering. Remember the absolute rule of the altar from the book of Leviticus. No leaven was allowed in the presence of God. The sacrifice had to be perfectly pure. It could not contain the silent, spreading rot of the old world. As Jesus hangs on the cross, he carries no leaven of his own. He has no hidden hypocrisy. He has no pride. He has no secret rebellion against the Father. He is entirely pure. And because he has no sin of his own, he is able to take the sin of the world upon himself. He allows the brutal, oppressive empire of sin to crush him. But there is a detail in the timing of the crucifixion that is easy to miss, and it connects this ancient baking command directly to the tomb. Jesus dies on the preparation day for the Passover. His body is taken down from the cross in a hurry, before the Sabbath begins, and he is laid in a borrowed tomb. He remains in the grave as the sun sets and the 7-day feast of unleavened bread officially begins. In the biblical world, what happens to a normal body in a tomb? It decays. It breaks down. Just like a lump of old sourdough starter ferments and sours, death introduces the ultimate physical corruption. But Psalm 16, verse 10, gave a prophecy about the coming Messiah. It said, "You will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay." Jesus is the true unleavened bread. Even in death, his body experiences no decay. The corruption of the grave cannot touch him. The old fermentation of sin and death has no power over his flesh. When he rises on the third day, he leaves the tomb behind. He breaks the ancient cycle of Egypt permanently. The continuous chain of human sin, passed down from generation to generation like an old starter dough, is finally severed. He offers a completely new beginning, a new humanity, a new batch of dough, entirely free from the old rot. The physical symbol that began in the dark hours of the Exodus has reached its absolute fulfillment in the empty tomb. Jesus has done what no one else could do. He swept the house clean. But the story of the unleavened bread does not end at the resurrection. Because Jesus defeated the ancient leaven of sin, the apostles realized that the followers of Jesus could not simply go back to living the old way, which leaves the early church, and us, with one final, ongoing command. After the resurrection, the early Christians had to figure out what it meant to live in the wake of the empty tomb. The true Passover lamb had been sacrificed. The ultimate cycle of sin and death had been broken. But how were they supposed to walk that out in their daily lives? About 20 years after the crucifixion, the Apostle Paul writes a letter to the church in Corinth. The Corinthian church is deeply messy. They are surrounded by the wealth, pride, and immorality of the Roman Empire, and they are allowing some of that corruption to quietly spread inside their own community. They are tolerating hidden sin. To wake them up, Paul does not just give them a list of rules. He reaches all the way back to the night of the Exodus. He reaches back to the ancient baking instructions given in the shadow of Egypt. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 7 and 8, Paul writes this, "Clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new lump, just as you are in fact unleavened. For Christ, our Passover, also has been sacrificed." Notice what Paul is doing. He is taking the ancient, physical command to sweep the house, and he is applying it directly to the human heart and the local church. He says, "Christ has died. The blood of the Lamb is on the doorpost of your life. Therefore, you can no longer keep the sourdough starter of the old empire. You cannot hold on to the hidden, spreading corruption of your past. You must sweep the house." But Paul adds a beautiful, profound detail. He tells them to clear out the old leaven so they can be a new batch of dough, just as you are in fact unleavened. Because of what Jesus did on the cross, their true identity is already pure. They have been washed. They have been made new. Now, Paul is simply telling them to live on the outside exactly who they are on the inside. Then, Paul gives the final instruction. He says, "Therefore let us celebrate the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth." This is the ultimate fulfillment of the Passover command. The physical festival of unleavened bread was pointing forward to a permanent spiritual reality. To follow Jesus is to live your entire life in the festival of unleavened bread. It is a life that refuses the puffed-up air of human pride. It is a life that rejects the hidden spread of hypocrisy. It is a life defined entirely by sincerity and truth. Look at the massive journey of this single, physical object. It began as a rushed baking instruction in a slave cabin in Egypt. It became a defense against arrogance in the wilderness. It became the strict rule of purity at the holy altar. It became the sharpest warning Jesus gave against religious hypocrisy. And finally, it became the exact physical symbol of the Savior's broken body on the cross. God took the poorest, simplest food in the ancient world, and He used it to dismantle the pride of empires. He used it to show us that salvation does not come through our own inflated righteousness, but through absolute dependence on the pure, uncorrupted sacrifice of Christ. If this journey through Scripture has helped you see the Bible with fresh eyes, consider subscribing to the channel so you do not miss the next deep dive into the Word. When you read the Exodus story again, and you see the Israelites eating that flat, dense loaf on the night they escaped, you are not just looking at a historical menu. You are looking at the quiet architecture of redemption. The bread of affliction was never just a memory of the past. It was the pathway to the bread of life.